Today on Market Journal, guess what? You're not the only one who's hot, your animals are too. We'll talk with an expert who has some pointers on the proper way to manage cattle on these hot summer days. And we're all about that basis. As it moves higher and higher, are there any signs of it cooling off? Plus, the EPA announces a proposal involving ethanol blending. Hear why the industry's leaders aren't too pleased about it. This week's edition of Market Journal starts right now.
Market Journal, television for agricultural business decisions, is a presentation of the University of Nebraska-Lincoln's Institute of Agriculture and Natural Resources.
Promotional support is provided by the Nebraska Farmer Magazine.
Hello everyone, I'm Troy Moling, and thanks for joining us today on Market Journal. Hope you're having a good day, and I hope you've been able to stay cool out there as well, because that's topping our show this week, the scorching temperatures. And if you're hot, there's a good chance your animals are too. So to stay cool or to keep grazing? That's the question many cattle will ask themselves this time of year when out in the summertime sun. And it's a big question because the more time cattle spend trying to stay cool, the less time they spend eating, growing, producing milk, and making you profits. We spoke with an expert to get his advice on what you can do. One hot topic during the scorching summer months is finding the best way to keep your cattle cool. According to Animal Environment Extension Specialist Dr. Rick Stowell, when the mercury rises, a cow's love for eating takes a back seat to finding ways to beat the heat.
What this means for the producer is that it'll take longer for them to get up to the desired body weight to sell them or market them. And this means that their feed efficiency will go down and feed costs for that same product will go up. And for the cow-calf operation, what they face is that it's harder to get cows pregnant and keep them pregnant when it's hot out. And so there's extra breeding costs associated with that, and there's potential costs of keeping a cow that's open or not pregnant. Do they maintain that cow or do they sell it?
Stowell says using the temperature-humidity index can help determine how hot and uncomfortable your cattle are. Research shows when the THI is about 75, cattle may be at risk for heat stress. Keeping an eye on the dew point is good practice too.
Dew point temperature doesn't vary throughout the day like temperature and humidity do, but if the dew point temperature is getting in the upper 60s or into the 70s, we can be pretty sure that cattle are going to be impacted.
As far as symptoms for cattle that are exhibiting heat stress, it's important to look for panting and an increased respiration rate.
If we think about the dog days of summer, how do dogs behave when it gets hot and sticky? They will start panting, they'll start slobbering around, mouth open. And we don't want cattle to do that normally. Cattle aren't designed like dogs. But they will start having those behaviors. They will start breathing fast, panting, and when they're under stress, they will have open mouth breathing and kind of slobbering with their tongue out.
And even on especially hot days, you can sometimes still catch a breeze. That's why Dr. Stowell offers the reminder to keep your cattle's pen free from obstructions so air can pass through. You may also want to provide portable water and shade that can be moved as the animals do. And adjust your schedule to limit heat stress on the animals as much as possible.
When do we feed and handle cattle? We want to feed and handle cattle early in the morning, and if we don't need to handle cattle when it's hot, push that back and try to keep that extra stress for a time when they're not under heat stress.
Now, this heat isn't anything to play around with. Make sure you have your cattle plenty of fresh water. Maybe even have some extra water on hand too if you need it. And we've posted a link to the temperature humidity index that we mentioned in that story. That's on the Market Journal website, and you'll also find some information on how a few changes to your cattle's feeding can reduce heat stress. Moving on, and while it's hot now, many corn and soybean producers in central Nebraska dealt with enough rain last week to leave their fields underwater. Corn was around the V6 stage, with some even close to tasseling. Soybeans were V1 and all the way up to near flowering. Additionally, Cropping Systems Extension Educator Sarah Sivits says the flooding was quite variable around her area.
When the plants are smaller, they can survive for a few days underwater or partially submerged compared to fully submerged. But with the high temperatures that we had kind of across the board, that was very detrimental to some producers' fields. Just because if it wasn't able to drain back fast enough or, in a short amount of time, the longer that crop sat under that water, the more oxygen that was depleted from the soil, so it wasn't available to the roots. And hence it just became a very stressful situation for those plants.
And though the waters have gone down, it's left questions as to how what was already planted will be affected.
But one of the things that a lot of people are looking at now is that those waters have receded back from those floods, is seeing all the residue, all the mud that is caked onto those plants. And so they're wondering, well, okay, it survived the water. Now is it going to survive the mud? And sometimes it might, sometimes it won't. It just depends. You have mud that is caked onto the leaf surface, and we need those leaves in order to capture sunlight so it can photosynthesize. And if it's covered, it's not a good situation for that plant.
Unfortunately, the extent of the damage may not be fully realized until closer to harvest. Flooding can make the crops more prone to certain diseases too, and we'll have more with Sarah on that during next week's show. Let's jump into markets now, and I was joined by Tredas commodity broker Doug Simon on Wednesday. We talked basis, weather, and pricing, but we began by seeing if there's anything to be learned from the latest WASDE report.
USDA used the numbers from the National Ag Statistics report from the end of June, and they used that 91.7 million acres of corn and 80 million acres of beans. That was the big number that came out of that June report, and basically told us that farmers were going to plant a lot more corn than what they intended to relative to the beans, and what the prices where they were, that was probably expected. But the market then on for the WASDE report, they just used the same 166 national yield on the corn, and the beans they cut the yield down to 48.5, and basically took the carry out to 2 billion on the corn, and the beans is just under 800 million bushels. So those numbers, were higher than what people were hoping. But there's, a lot of questions going into the next report about what prevented planted acres are going to be and what yields are going to be. Market opened up on that Thursday morning, jumped up pretty aggressively, and then it was down about 25 cents on the corn, and then it kind of regrouped and kind of came back during the day. So one of the more volatile days in terms of trading, but the numbers weren't a lot different than probably what the trade was expecting at the end of the day.
So I guess the big takeaway, we're just going to wait for the August report, then go from there.
Well, everybody's wondering, what's going on with prevent plant acres, and they're going to resurvey now here during July, and they'll have that into the August numbers. So we'll start getting numbers from that in August. There was a report today from Pro Farmer, Bill Northey from USDA, made a statement that there was going to be 8 million acres of prevent plant corn and maybe 2 million acres of beans and possibly more, which was kind of unprecedented to see a statement like that. But those rumors have been around in the market for a while here. Not rumors, people on the ground trying to figure out how much prevent plant there's going to be. So that's a big question, as are the yields coming up.
Just keep waiting and seeing.
You bet.
All right, so let's look at corn basis for a minute. And you brought this up when you were last on here back in April. So I have a pretty interesting clip that we want to show the viewers at home. Check this out.
From a marketing standpoint, basis levels right now are very, very, very strong. I think I've made comments to you, they're hot. Yeah, so the levels at Columbus and Blair are 10 over the May board. And we're going to roll into July next week, and there's 9 cents a carry. And so I'd expect those basis numbers versus the July to firm up a little bit more.
Okay, so that was about 2.5 months ago. You told me now that basis isn't just hot, it's on fire. So what do we need to know?
It's even gotten firmer with the acres that didn't get planted back in Ohio and Indiana with the crop being so late. They obviously can kind of see what's going on over there, and the basis levels in the Eastern Corn Belt are 70 over the September board now. So there was carry between the July and the SEP, and so we're even firmer now, versus the SEP than we were versus either the May or the July. So it's definitely on fire. But basically they are trying to get a hold of corn and pull it into that marketplace, whether it's coming from, from Iowa, if it's coming from North Dakota, wherever they're trying to, they're trying to redirect rail and move that corn, or at least try to hold it out there, which is also improving the basis in Nebraska. ADM Columbus has been 15 over the last couple weeks. Blair been up in that 15 over market as well. Bartlett and Council Bluffs has been 10 over. You've got markets in, Sire and Council Bluffs has been 8 over. So they're all very positive here. Basically playing a tug of war. You've got the Group 3 rail bids for harvest delivery are trading about 30 cents better than they were last year. So our basis levels going into fall, into harvest, and into new crop should be significantly better than they were a year ago. Basically, as we have that tug of war, and basis is basically the thing that directs corn around in the country and tries to put it into a under supplied market. And so it's on fire trying to get it moved around where it needs to be. We've had problems with logistics, with the flooding, with barges. It's messed up some of the rail as well. But it's hot, and it looks like it's going to stay hot here for a little bit.
And basis, that's not the only thing that's hot. The weather is hot. So how is that impacting corn and soybeans that have been planted late? How's that going to impact the markets?
Well, we had silking this last week. Nebraska was around 12%. Illinois was 19%. Typically, we'd be quite a bit further ahead. If we had this heat during the or post-pollination, it'd been pretty devastating. We've been pretty wet. Big question is how well these crops rooted down. In 2010, we were in a situation where we were wet, didn't root down real well, had really hot weather in that first week of August. Took our yield back from like a 160 in the 2010 or 2009 crop year, and we went to a 154, so it dropped it off quite a bit. So I don't, right now we're still in pollination, early pollination, so the heat's helping, especially in Indiana and Ohio. But the ridge and stuff is supposed to cool off here going into first part of next week, but then it's supposed to ramp back up, not be in the hundreds possibly, but back in the 92, 93 again, late next week. So it doesn't look like it's going to stick, but it's going to be coming in and out, which is still going to be, people are going to be watching that pretty closely to see what August looks like.
Then speaking of weather, Barry brought some rain down farther to the south. So from a marketing standpoint, what are some ways to use this weather market to our advantage?
Well, we had a really strong market on Sunday. We opened up, firmer and had a positive Sunday night, and then the weather models are looking, seeing the rain, kind of coming in. Barry was basically moving into the eastern corn belt and pushed some of that rain up into Ohio and Indiana. We got some rain over there, but that ridge out west is basically a move that kind of moisture over the top of the ridge and put it up into Minnesota, a little bit into Nebraska. We had some, some rains kind of widespread, and or just not everywhere, but different parts of the state of Nebraska. But then it also moved into Iowa today on Wednesday, so we're kind of getting some market pressure because of those rains that we're getting there. But from a marketing standpoint, with the volatility, probably got to be looking at offers above the market, because it goes up, and then the world numbers are big enough from corn, beans, and wheat that seems like these funds out, they want to come in and hit it and knock it back anytime that we get any kind of levity out of the market.
Thanks to Doug for coming on the show. We'll have DTN's Todd Holtman as our guest next week. Next up, the country is gearing up for a big election in 2020, but Nebraska Farm Service Agency's county offices are currently accepting nominations of their own. County committee elections are upon us, and becoming a member of your county committee means being a direct link between the ag community and USDA. Each of FSA's 71 offices has a county committee which serves the needs of local producers and helps in choosing what FSA programs their counties will offer. Nebraska FSA's Bobbie Kriz-Wickham stopped by to share more.
We're in the nomination period right now, and it goes through August 1. So producers who might be interested in learning more about their county committee and what it takes to be a member and the election process should talk to their county executive director before that August 1 deadline and get their nomination form in. Producers can nominate themselves, or actually they can nominate someone else who they feel might be a good quality candidate.
So you just heard Bobbie say it. Get your nominations in by August 1st. Ballots will be mailed out to eligible voters in November. We've included more information and a link to the nomination form on the Market Journal website. Time for trivia now, and this week we're talking about the world of wheat. Here's today's question. The average bushel of wheat is 60 pounds, so how many loaves of bread can you make with that? Is the answer 52, 59, 64, or is it 73? Make your selection, and I'll have the answer after Al's forecast. And it's time for weather now with Nebraska Extension Ag Climatologist and Market Journal Chief Meteorologist Al Dutcher. Al, this week's weather is no joke. Can we expect a cool down anytime soon?
Well, Troy, you're absolutely correct. We did see that hot weather come into the state. We did advertise that last week, and unfortunately it came to fruition. We didn't really have the wind the first couple days of the week, but boy, did it start to kick in on Wednesday, and along with it, we've seen our temperatures skyrocket into the upper 90s, and we did have some low 100 readings across the state. And we also seen some scattered convection developing during the overnight hours and then fading out as we got to the morning hours. And the big winners during this last 7-day period was portions of central and north central Nebraska. We had some isolated totals that were essentially in the 1 to 2 inch range in southeast and northeast Nebraska, but for the most part, high and dry was the name of the game for a substantial portion of south central and southwest Nebraska, as well as portions of the southern panhandle. And as we go forward in time, we are looking at the development of a cold front that's going to basically cool us down to slightly below normal temperatures here in the foreseeable future. But then we'll turn our attention late next week for the reemergence of the heat as it starts to build in from the west. As we go to the upper air models, draw your attention to the ridge starting to be pushed down toward the south in reaction to this front that is trying to push out of the Dakotas and energizing the upper air trough over the Great Lakes. Low pressure is shown in the Texas Panhandle. That moisture feed and intersection in the front is the reason why we have seen the thunderstorm development that is going to take place across northern Nebraska, and then that will slide southward during the overnight hours, such that it will have a ridge and northwest flow in place, and we'll start to see the thunderstorm activity at the surface below south of Interstate 80 start to push off toward the southeast, and then we go into a much cooler pattern as highs will drop dramatically into the 80s. The ridge still remains in place, but we get the cool north flow that will primarily impact much of eastern Nebraska as high pressure settles in. We'll be looking at highs that will be ranging from the low to mid 80s north to the mid to upper 80s south as the thunderstorm activity passes well to our south. And then we continue to see this northwesterly flow in eastern Nebraska, although the ridge slips slightly toward the east as high pressure starts to slip over Iowa. Absolutely no precipitation is forecasted at this time as the main belt remains well to our south. Another dry day with temperatures that will moderate into the mid to upper 90s. And then we start to see on Wednesday the ridge starting to push toward the east, so we'll start to see 90-degree temperatures widespread across western Nebraska. We'll be looking at the upper 80s across eastern Nebraska. Low pressure in the Texas Panhandle doesn't have a lot of moisture to work with, but the monsoon moisture is starting to stream toward the north, and that becomes a key ingredient later in the forecast. As this high starts to expand on Thursday, we start to see much warmer temperatures back into the low 90s across the southern part of the state, upper 80s in the northern part of the state. And again, we start to see monsoon flow coming in, so we could see some scattered convection developing Thursday night, and that's spreading eastward across northern Nebraska. And then on Friday, the ridge starts to build even farther toward the north. We still have a thermal low basically in southwestern Kansas. Not a lot of moisture to work with. Most of it's going to come in the monsoon flow and sweep over top of the ridge. And once again, we have the potential for another system to basically move across the Nebraska and South Dakota border. So overall, we do have some scattered thunderstorm activity and a warmer trend as we go into the middle of next week. And if we go out even farther, CPC is indicating below normal temperature. From everything I see, the ridge builds back up, and I think this is way overdone. This is going to be pushed way to our east, and this warmer temperatures are going to encompass much of the western half of the United States. And in terms of precipitation, do agree with this. It does look like a pretty sustained period of below normal precipitation, particularly centered from Iowa eastward. We look like we are going to catch this monsoonal flow. So overall, it looks like a fairly dry forecast outside of this weekend with a little bit cooler temperatures, Troy.
Thanks, Al. Back to trivia now, and this week we asked, how many loaves of bread can you make from an average 60-pound bushel of wheat? The answer is C, 64 loaves. Hey, guess it's time to go get a sandwich. Moving on, and the U.S. Environmental Protection Agency Administrator Andrew Wheeler issued a proposed rule under the Renewable Fuel Standards program last week. That rule would set the minimum amount of renewable fuel obligations that must be supplied to the market in the year 2020 at 15 billion gallons. On many counts, that could be construed as good news for the ethanol industry, but some argue it isn't enough. Let's toss it over to Market Journal's Bill Dodd with more.
That's right, Troy. There seems to be a bit of displeasure among some state leaders regarding the recent volume increases in the renewable volume obligations. The recent increase raises the 2020 supplied market amount by 120 million gallons. Now, to some, that may seem like a significant increase. However, when compared to the amount of fuel consumed in the United States on a daily basis, the proposed increase begins to look a bit like a drop in the bucket. According to the U.S. Energy Information Administration, in 2018, the United States consumed 142.86 billion gallons of fuel. Now, that's an average of about 391.4 million gallons per day. Since taking office, President Trump has made good on his promise to make E15 available for year-round purchase. In that same time frame, the EPA under his administration has since quadrupled the number of RFS, or Renewable Fuel Standard waivers, granted to small refineries. Now, under the original guidelines of the Renewable Fuel Standards, the United States should be blending up to about 30 billion gallons of ethanol per year. Nebraska Governor Pete Ricketts had this to say in response to the proposed Renewable Fuel Standard volume obligations. This proposal does not reflect the agency's legal duty to enforce a robust RFS or the President's commitment to our farmers. Ricketts also went on to urge the EPA to reallocate waived gallons and ensure that the agency is giving our farmers and ethanol producers the predictability they need, especially during tough times for agriculture." End quote. I recently spoke with Nebraska Ethanol Board Administrator Roger Berry, who conveyed to me that the production lost from the gallons waived by the EPA greatly outweighs the benefits of the proposed production increase.
It's a very, very, very minimal increase in the Renewable Fuel Standard, which, as a point of reference, is 10 billion gallon off of what the original Renewable Fuel Standard placed it to be. We're supposed to be blending about 30 billion gallon of ethanol into our fuel now. Well, with this 20.04 billion gallon that the 2020 proposed renewable volume obligation does, once again, 10 billion gallons short from where we were supposed to be on this. If you look at those small refinery exemptions, for the exemptions that were issued in the years of 17 and 18, there's 2.6 billion gallons that were lost due to those small refinery exemptions. 2.6 billion gallons is a whole lot more than a 120 million gallon increase. Plus, factor in, there's still 38 exemptions waiting to be approved by the EPA. So if they approve all those, I don't know what those gallons would amount to, but it would be, once again, it'd probably take us over a total of 3 billion gallons lost. So if we could have had those gallons put back in to the renewable volume obligations, the proposed renewable volume obligations, it would have had a huge effect on our producers here in Nebraska and across the nation. And let's keep in mind that we're supporting over 1,400 direct jobs right here in Nebraska alone. That's worth protecting.
Now, to put that in perspective, according to the EIA, Nebraska has more than 24 operational ethanol plants that use more than 700 million bushels of corn per year. The industry also produces more than 6.4 million metric tons of distillers' grains, and this is a high-protein feed ingredient used for cattle. Along with domestic use, Nebraska ethanol and distillers' grain are leading export goods to the state's international trading partners. And according to the Nebraska Ethanol Board, Nebraska's ethanol plants represent a $5 billion economic impact in the state. Now, it's not hard to see the impact the ethanol industry has on Midwest producers. With Nebraska ranking as the second largest ethanol producing state in the U.S., Iowa boasts over 40 plants with a capacity of more than 102 million barrels of fuel ethanol per year. With the use of a grant from the USDA's Biofuel Infrastructure Partnership, Iowa now has over 250 public E85 stations, which is third most in the nation behind Illinois and Minnesota, respectively. With the dawn of year-round E15 sales upon consumers, Roger tells me he thinks this product represents a real threat to oil conglomerates and expects to see resistance in getting the level of blending up to the numbers we should be seeing from the original Renewable Fuel Standard proposal.
It's going to be like always. It's going to be a huge fight. It is really, truly a David versus Goliath. The oil companies are huge. The ethanol industry isn't that big. They always refer to big ag. What's big ag? Agriculture is made up of family farmers. Over 95% of the farmers in this nation are family farmers. So where's big ag in that? There truly is big oil in the big conglomerates that they've, with their billions and billions of profits, who basically have a monopoly on our fuels. That's why we're trying to get ethanol in there, and that's why it's so hard, and that's why there is always a fight that ensues when it comes to that. It all comes down to market share. That's really what it amounts to at the end of the day. The oil companies have said we will not give up any more than the 10% that we've already given up. Of course, the Renewable Fuel Standard says that we will have about 10% of of ethanol blended into our fuel. So they've drawn the line in the sand, said no more than 10%. Now with E15 coming on, they see that as a huge threat, and they have really stepped up those wars where basically the media wars, I guess you could call them. You know, it's time for the American consumer to quit believing those lies and to start finding out for themselves that as they put more ethanol into their car, the air's going to get cleaner and their car's going to run better and they're going to have less money going out of their pockets. So prepare for a fight.
In short, while getting these numbers up would certainly give the ethanol industry a boost, as well as farmers, Rogers says the consumer in agricultural states like Nebraska would undoubtedly benefit, as we have seen time and time again. As the farming community prospers, so does the state. Now next week we'll dive a bit deeper into the subject with Roger and examine how the oil and ethanol industries are in somewhat of a symbiotic relationship, whether they want to be or not. But for now, that's all I have, and I'll send it back to you, Troy.
Thanks, Bill. Look forward to more on that next week. Closing out our show today, and this sounds like a lot of fun, Concord's Haskell Ag Lab will be hosting the Science and Ag Family Field Day. It's free and open to the public and will have an array of researchers and Nebraska Extension professionals on site to answer any of your questions. You can also check out the Mobile Beef Lab and hear presentations on topics including land values and the effects of dicamba. Extension's Sarah Roberts says there's something for everyone.
I think it's just a nice opportunity for people to bring their whole family out and do something fun that's just open and available in kind of the rural areas instead of having to travel far away to come to something fun.
The all-day event takes place on July 24th. Once more, it's free and lunch will be provided too. We've got more on the Market Journal website. That's going to do it for this week's show. If you missed a story, be sure to download the Market Journal mobile app or follow us on social media to join in on the conversation. Next week, Palmer amaranth is invasive and widespread. We'll talk with a weed scientist in Arkansas who's using what he's learned to help farmers in Nebraska. And recent flooding means certain crop diseases could be on the rise too. Learn what they are. That and a whole lot more. Hope to see you right back here next time. I'm Troy Moling. Thanks for watching.
Join Market Journal online at marketjournal.unl.edu. You can also follow us on Twitter, Instagram, and Facebook. Promotional support is provided by the Nebraska Farmer Magazine. Market Journal is produced by the University of Nebraska-Lincoln's Institute of Agriculture and Natural Resources.